The cursed girl. John Carter stood in the middle of the ruins, his boots crunching against the broken stone. The air was thick with dust, the sky above dark with storm clouds. The planet Sci-Fi had been abandoned for centuries, its cities now silent graveyards of a forgotten race. He adjusted the strap of his plasma rifle, his eyes scanning the ruins. The mission was simple: explore, collect data, and leave. But something about this place felt wrong. Then he saw her. A statue, carved from smooth gray stone, stood in the center of the ruins. It was the statue of a girl, her face frozen in time, her arms outstretched as if she had been reaching for something. She looked alive. Too alive. John frowned. This wasn't like the other alien statues he had seen. Those were rough, weathered, broken by time. But this one, it was perfect. There was no sign of erosion, no cracks. It was as if she had been frozen just yesterday. He stepped closer, brushing the dust off her face. Her eyes. They were smooth, polished stone, but for a moment, he swore he saw them move. A shiver crawled up his spine. Then, a whisper. "Help me." John spun around, rifle raised. But there was no one there, just empty ruins and the cold wind howling through the broken pillars. His pulse pounded in his ears. Had he imagined it? He turned back to the statue. Her expression had changed. It had to be a trick of the light. It had to be. But then the ground shook. A low, rumbling growl echoed through the ruins. From the shadows, something moved. John's breath caught in his throat. At first, it looked like shifting dust. But then he saw them. Creatures. They crawled out from the cracks in the ground, their bodies long and thin, like twisted shadows come to life. Their eyes glowed red, their movements unnatural. John took a step back, gripping his rifle. One of the creatures let out a horrible screech and lunged. John fired. A plasma bolt ripped through the creature, but instead of dying, it melted into smoke, reforming instantly. Oh well. More creatures slithered forward, surrounding him. John backed toward the statue, his mind racing. His weapons wouldn't work. There were too many of them. The whisper came again. "Please, help me." John turned to the statue. He didn't know why, but he felt like she was the answer. With a deep breath, he reached out and placed his hand on her stone arm. A shockwave erupted. A blinding white light burst from the statue, sending the creatures screaming and scattering into the shadows. The air crackled with energy, and for a brief moment, John felt something move beneath his fingers. A pulse, like a heartbeat. Then silence. The ruins were still again. The creatures were gone. John stepped back, his breath heavy. His eyes went to the statue. A single crack had appeared on the girl's cheek. Stone dust drifted to the ground. And then, her eyes glowed. Not stone, not lifeless. Real. John swallowed hard. Who was she? And why did he feel like he had just woken up something that should have stayed asleep? The curse of Sci-Fi. The crack on the statue's cheek was small, almost invisible in the dim light. But to John Carter, it felt like the universe had just shifted. He took a slow step back, gripping his rifle tighter. The ruins of Sci-Fi had already been unsettling, but this was something beyond logic. The girl's statue wasn't just a statue. Her eyes had moved. Her heartbeat had pulsed under his fingertips. And the creatures, the shadow beasts, had fled the moment he touched her. He exhaled, steadying himself. Was it magic? No, that wasn't possible. He had traveled to dozens of planets, studied ancient technology, seen things that defied human understanding. But there was always a reason, a hidden truth beneath the myths. He had to find it. But first, he needed to get out of here. The air still tingled with leftover energy from whatever had just happened. The ruins stood silent, but John felt watched, as if unseen eyes were waiting for him to make a mistake. He glanced back at the girl, then made a decision. He couldn't leave her here. If she was alive, If she had been trapped in stone somehow, then she needed help. John pulled a device from his belt and activated a grav lift, setting it beneath the base of the statue. With a faint hum, the technology kicked in, making the heavy stone form almost weightless. "All right, stone girl," he muttered, pushing her forward. "Let's figure out what the hell you are." The warning. The journey back to his ship was slow. Every step felt like a risk. He kept his weapon ready, scanning the darkness. The shadow creatures didn't return, but their presence still lingered. He could feel them in the wind, hear them in the whispering ruins. By the time he reached the edge of the city, he spotted movement up ahead. John stopped, narrowing his eyes. Not another creature. This was different. A man. No, not human, but humanoid. Tall, covered in layered armor with a long, tattered cloak trailing behind him. His skin was dark blue, his eyes like molten gold. An alien warrior. John's grip on his rifle tightened, but he didn't fire. The figure didn't look hostile. At least, not yet. The alien raised his hand. "You should not have touched her, human." His voice was deep, steady. "You do not understand what you have done." John exhaled slowly. "That's funny. I was just thinking the same thing." The alien took a step closer, golden eyes flickering toward the floating statue. A shadow passed over his face. Recognition, maybe even regret. "She is cursed," he said. John raised an eyebrow. "Cursed. The punishment of the betrayer." The alien's voice darkened. "She was turned to stone so that her truth would never be spoken." John glanced at the girl's unmoving form. The crack on her cheek seemed larger now, as if it had grown since he first touched her. He frowned. "So, she wasn't always like this?" "No." The alien warrior hesitated. "She was once something else." John narrowed his eyes. "And who exactly are you?" The warrior straightened. "I am Ikar, guardian of the forgotten." "Great title," John muttered. "And what do the forgotten want?" "To protect the universe from what she was meant to become." Something about the way he said it sent a chill down John's spine. He looked at the statue again. At her delicate features, her outstretched hands, the way her frozen expression seemed so desperate. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like a victim. John shook his head. "I don't believe in curses," he said. "There's always a reason behind every myth. And if she's been turned to stone, then something, or someone, did this to her." Eckart's expression darkened. "And if she was turned to stone for a reason?" John stared him down. "Then I'll find out why." Silence stretched between them. The ruins around them seemed deeper, as if the darkness itself was listening. Then suddenly, a low rumbling shook the ground beneath them. John looked around, instincts flaring. This wasn't an earthquake. This was something waking up. Eckert swore under his breath. "They know." John didn't like the sound of that. Who knows? The ones who never wanted her freed. The temperature dropped sharply, the shadows thickening unnaturally. In the distance, a glowing red light began to rise from the ruins. Not fire. Not energy. Eyes. Thousands of them. John felt a pit in his stomach. Eckert turned to him, urgency in his voice. "If you truly want to understand the truth, if you want to save yourself, then you must leave this place now." John clenched his jaw, looking back at the girl. Leave? Not a chance. He had come here looking for answers. Now he had more questions than ever. And he wasn't leaving until he found them. The key to breaking the curse. John Carter didn't believe in curses, but standing here, staring at the girl trapped in stone, he couldn't deny something unnatural had happened to her. The crack on her cheek had widened since he first touched her. It wasn't just a statue breaking. It was a prison weakening. And now, whatever had trapped her knew she was waking up. The ruins of HFY trembled under his boots. Distant shrieks filled the air, echoing from the shadows. The red eyes he had seen earlier weren't just watching anymore. They were coming. Beside him, Ekkar, the alien warrior, pulled a long, curved blade from his belt. The weapon hummed with a faint blue energy. His golden eyes narrowed. "If we stay here, we die," Eckhart warned. John exhaled sharply, gripping his rifle. "Then let's move." He pushed the floating grav lift forward, carrying the stone girl toward his ship. The shadows twisted behind them, unnatural creatures crawling out from the ruins. They didn't walk like living beings. They flowed, their bodies shifting like liquid smoke, their glowing eyes locked onto John and Eckhart. The guardians of the curse. John didn't hesitate. He fired. Plasma bolts ripped through the creatures, but just like before, they melted into the air, reforming instantly. Eckhart cursed in his alien tongue. "You cannot kill them like that." "Great," John muttered. "Any bright ideas?" "Run." "Not a bad plan." John turned and sprinted, pushing the floating stone girl ahead. The ruins blurred around them, pillars crumbling as the shadow creatures swarmed forward. Eckhart raised his blade, slashing through the air. Unlike John's bullets, his weapon worked. When it struck a shadow beast, the creature let out a screech and evaporated into nothing. "Magic sword?" John asked between breaths. "Nanite-infused plasma blade," Eckhart corrected. "Cuts through corrupted energy." "Good to know." Ahead, John saw his ship, the Rogue Star, a sleek black spacecraft waiting just outside the ruins. The sight of it filled him with relief. Then the ground exploded. John barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side as a massive black figure emerged from the earth. It was twice the size of the others, its jagged wings spreading wide, its body covered in moving shadows. The air around it warped as if reality itself was bending. Eckhart froze beside him. "The High Warden," he whispered. John had no idea what that meant, but judging from Eckhart's expression, it wasn't good. The creature lifted a clawed hand, and the ruins darkened. Light itself seemed to be drained from the area. Then it spoke. The stone must remain sealed. John felt a pressure in his skull, like something was trying to dig into his mind. He stumbled back, gritting his teeth. The warden pointed at the girl. "Return the betrayer to her prison." John glanced at the stone girl, then at Eckhart. "I'm guessing that's not an option." Eckhart gripped his blade tighter. "If you do that, her truth dies with her." John didn't know what truth the girl held, but he had seen enough to know one thing. If these creatures wanted her trapped, then freeing her was the right choice. So he did the only thing that made sense. He grabbed the girl's hand. A shockwave blasted through the air. The warden let out a horrible shriek, recoiling as golden cracks spread across its body. The girl's stone skin began to glow. John felt something change. The heartbeat beneath the stone grew stronger. The cracks widened, and suddenly, a voice echoed through his mind. "You came back for me." John's eyes widened. The voice was soft, almost familiar, as if he had known it forever. But that was impossible. More shadows surged forward. The warden howled, recovering from the blast. John turned to Eckhart. "How do we break the curse?" Eckhart hesitated. Then his expression hardened. "There is an ancient temple, a place where the first curses were made." He pointed toward the distant mountains. "If you bring her there, she might be freed." "Might?" John asked. "She was turned to stone for a reason, human," Eckhart said darkly. "We do not know if freeing her will save us or doom us all." John didn't care. He looked at the girl, at the glowing cracks forming across her stone body. Something inside her was fighting to break free. And whatever it was, John was willing to risk everything to find out. He lifted her up, ignoring the warden's roar, and sprinted toward his ship. The girl awakens. The Rogue Star shot through the sky, its engines roaring as it left the ruins of Typhera behind. Inside, John Carter stood at the control panel, one hand gripping the console as he punched in new coordinates. His other hand was shaking, not from fear, but from what he had just done. The girl. He glanced back at her. She was still trapped in stone, but the cracks along her body were spreading, glowing with golden light. The curse was breaking, but too slowly. Beside her, Ecker stood with his arms crossed, his golden eyes unreadable. "You don't know what you've unleashed," he muttered. John shot him a glare. "She's not a weapon. She's a person." "She was," Ecker corrected. "A long time ago." John clenched his jaw. He didn't have time for cryptic warnings. Right now, their priority was reaching the Temple of Curses, the only place where the girl might be freed completely. But deep down, one question still burned in his mind. Who is she? The dream of the past. John didn't realize he had fallen asleep until he found himself somewhere else. The metal walls of his ship were gone. Instead, he stood in a vast alien city, its towers reaching into the sky. The streets were filled with people, tall, elegant beings with the same glowing gold eyes as Eckar. Then he saw her. The stone girl, alive, walking, smiling. She stood at the center of a great hall, wearing ornate robes, her silver hair braided over one shoulder. Around her, dozens of others bowed, waiting for her to speak. A deep voice echoed in the chamber. "Princess Lyra, do you accept the burden of knowledge?" "Princess." John watched as the girl, Lyra, took a deep breath and nodded. "I do." A hooded figure stepped forward, holding a small crystal sphere. The moment Lyra touched it, her eyes glowed brighter, and she let out a shocked gasp. And then, chaos. The people around her shouted. Guards rushed in. The hooded figure tried to take the crystal back, but Lyra held on to it, her expression turning from fear to anger. Then John heard her whisper something. A single sentence. The war was a lie. The vision shattered. Awakening. John woke up gasping for air, his heart pounding. He looked around. The ship was still flying, and Eckard was still sitting beside the statue, sharpening his blade. But something had changed. A soft voice whispered in the air. John turned his head and froze. The statue's eyes were open. She was staring directly at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. The golden glow in her eyes pulsed like a heartbeat, as if she was caught between stone and flesh. Then she blinked. John swallowed. Hey. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Her fingers twitched, dust crumbling from them as her body began to move for the first time in centuries. Ecker sprang to his feet, his blade at the ready. Don't, John warned. Ecker didn't lower his weapon. She shouldn't be awake yet. Well, she is. John took a step closer, lowering himself to eye level with the girl. Hey, take it easy. You've been, frozen for a while. Lyra's gaze flickered between them, confused, disoriented. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, cracked from centuries of silence. Who are you? John exhaled, relieved that she could speak. John Carter. I. Before he could finish, the ship lurched violently. Alarms blared. Ecker turned toward the controls. We've got company. John rushed to the cockpit. Through the ship's front viewport, he saw 3 massive black warships emerging from hyperspace. And at the center of the lid ship, a face appeared on the transmission screen. John's stomach twisted. The High Warden. Return the betrayer, the creature commanded, its voice echoing with ancient power. John glanced at Lyra. She was still struggling to fully break free, her body half trapped in stone. But in her eyes, he saw fear. Not confusion, not anger. Fear. The Warden's forces weren't here to imprison her. They were here to kill her before she fully woke up. John's hands flew over the controls. Strap in. We're not stopping. Eckar cursed. Are you insane? You can't outrun them in this ship. I don't need to. John's lips twisted into a grin. I just need to do something they won't expect. He slammed the hyperjump button. The rogue star vanished into the void. The truth awaits. John leaned back, letting out a breath of relief. That'll buy us some time." But when he turned, he saw Lyra staring at her own hands. The stone was melting away, revealing soft, silver skin beneath. She flexed her fingers, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up at John. "You saw it, didn't you?" John hesitated. "Saw what?" Lyra closed her eyes. "The truth." John clenched his fists. The war was a lie. Lyra exhaled, the last of the stone crumbling from her face. "Yes," she whispered. "And now, they will do everything to stop us from proving it." John looked at Ekar, then back at Lyra. He wasn't sure what truth she had uncovered all those years ago, but he was damn sure he was about to find out. The girl awakens. The rogue star trembled as it tore through hyperspace, leaving the black warships of the High Warden behind. The ship's engines hummed in protest, stabilizing from the sudden hyperjump. Inside, the air was thick with tension. John Carter leaned against the cockpit console, his fingers running over the controls. He had just barely escaped with his life. But what unsettled him the most wasn't the Warden's attack. It was her. John turned slowly. The stone girl, Lyra, was waking up. She sat at the center of the cargo bay, her body still half trapped in stone. But the cracks had widened, revealing flesh beneath. Her silver hair was now visible, cascading over her shoulders like flowing mercury. But it was her eyes that held him frozen. Not glowing stone anymore. Real. Alive. Watching. Her lips moved, but the words were barely a whisper. "Where am I?" The mind that was stolen. John took a cautious step closer. "You're on my ship," he said, keeping his voice calm. "We just escaped a bunch of people who really wanted you dead." Lyra's breathing was uneven. She lifted her half-frozen hands, staring at them. The last bits of stone crumbled, revealing smooth skin beneath. She looked up at John, her golden eyes flickering with something. "Fractured. I don't." Then she screamed. A raw, painful sound that sent shivers down John's spine. She clutched her head, her body trembling as flashes of golden energy sparked around her. Ekar, standing near the doorway, drew his blade immediately. "She's unstable." John threw out a hand. "Put that down. She is not the same as before, human." Ekar's voice was tense. "You do not understand what she is." "I understand she's terrified." John moved to Lyra's side, kneeling beside her. Hey, look at me. You're safe now." She was shaking violently, her eyes darting around the room like she wasn't just seeing the ship, she was seeing something else. Too much, she whispered. Then, John saw what she saw. A vision of the forgotten. The world shifted. Suddenly, John wasn't on his ship anymore. He was in a palace of gold, standing before an ornate throne. Lyra was there, wearing elegant robes, her silver hair braided in intricate patterns, but she wasn't sitting on the throne. She was kneeling before it, and in front of her stood a towering figure, draped in shifting black robes, a crown of jagged obsidian spikes atop his head. The First Warden. His voice echoed through the chamber. "You have seen what should not be seen." Lyra's hands were bound in chains of light, her face streaked with anger and fear. "You lied," she spat. The war was never real." The Warden tilted his head. "And what would you do with such knowledge, child?" Lyra struggled against her bonds. "Tell them the truth." The Warden let out a soft, eerie chuckle. "Then let the truth die with you." He raised a hand, and Lyra's body turned to stone. John gasped as the vision snapped away, and he was suddenly back in his ship. His breath was ragged. His body was drenched in cold sweat. He turned to Lyra. She was still shaking, her fingers gripping the floor. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered. John didn't answer. Because if that vision was real, if Lyra had been turned to stone to silence her, then she wasn't just a victim. She was the key to a secret that could destroy the entire Warden Empire. The hunt begins. The ship jerked violently, pulling John back to reality. Alarms blared across the control panel. Ecker's eyes darkened. They found us. John ran to the cockpit. Through the viewport, he saw 3 smaller fighter ships emerging from hyperspace, Warden hunters. "They don't quit, do they?" John muttered. "They will chase her to the ends of the galaxy," Ecker said grimly. John gritted his teeth. No more running. If the Wardens wanted a fight, they were about to get one. He turned to Lyra, who was still shaking but more focused now. Her breathing had steadied. John extended a hand. "You ready to help me fight these bastards?" Lyra looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she took his hand. A soft golden glow pulsed from her fingertips. The last fragments of stone dust fell away, revealing her completely. Her voice was steady now. Strong. "Let's end this. The hidden war." The rogue star spun violently as laser fire ripped through space, barely missing the ship's hull. The Warden hunters were closing in, their sleek black vessels moving like shadows against the void. John Carter gritted his teeth, yanking the controls to the left. The ship veered sharply, dodging another plasma blast. "Ecker, get on the rear cannons," he barked. The alien warrior was already moving, his golden eyes sharp with battle focus. He sprinted toward the ship's weapons station, activating the auto turrets. Lyra, now fully awake, stood behind John, watching the chaos unfold. The last fragments of stone dust had fallen away from her skin, revealing a living being who had been trapped for centuries. But she wasn't just watching the battle. She was feeling something ancient stirring in her bones. The knowledge. Her memories were fractured, still coming back in flashes. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just about her. This was about the truth she had uncovered before she was turned to stone. The war had been a lie. The Wardens didn't want her because she was dangerous. They wanted her because she knew something that could destroy them. And she was starting to remember. The battle in the void. Ecker's cannons fired, lighting up the blackness of space. One of the Warden ships took a direct hit, spiraling out of control before exploding in a brilliant flash. John smirked. "Nice shot." 2 more ships remained, moving in fast. Lyra closed her eyes. A memory surfaced. She had once stood in battle, just like this, except it hadn't been on a ship. It had been on a planet, a battlefield filled with thousands of soldiers, all dying for a war that was never real. Her people had been told the Wardens were the enemy. But she had learned the truth. The Wardens had created the war. They had orchestrated both sides, controlling the conflict, keeping entire civilizations in fear and submission. And she had tried to stop it. The vault of truth. Her eyes snapped open. "I know where we need to go," she said suddenly. John didn't take his eyes off the controls. "Kinda busy here." "You don't understand," Lyra insisted. "There's a place, a vault, a hidden archive. It contains the truth about the war." John's hands tightened on the controls. "You sure about this?" "I remember now." Lyra's voice was firm. "Before they turned me to stone, I was trying to reach it. That's why they stopped me." Ecker's voice came through the comms. "That could be our only chance." John nodded sharply. "All right, give me coordinates." Lyra hesitated, then reached out, placing a hand on the ship's control panel. The moment she touched it, the screen glowed with golden energy, and a new set of coordinates automatically locked in. John and Ecker stared. Lyra pulled her hand back, looking just as shocked as they were. "I don't know how I did that." John exhaled. "We'll figure that out later." He slammed the hyperdrive switch. The rogue star vanished into hyperspace. The planet of secrets. The ship emerged from the jump over a desolate planet, its surface covered in endless black ruins. The place looked dead, but Lyra could feel it. The vault was here. John scanned the terrain. No signs of life. No signals. If this vault exists, it's buried deep. "It does exist," Lyra whispered. "And it's not empty." The moment they landed, the air felt wrong. A strange whispering sound drifted through the ruins, like voices from a time long past. John grabbed his rifle. "Stay close." Lyra stepped forward, a strange pull guiding her. And then the ground beneath her glowed, a hidden entrance. The stone shifted, revealing a massive underground doorway, covered in symbols she could now read. She spoke the words aloud. "The truth shall not be buried." The door rumbled open. John exchanged a look with Eckhart. "That's not ominous at all." They stepped inside. The revelation. The vault was massive, filled with ancient technology, glowing consoles, data archives, holograms frozen in time. Lyra walked forward, her hands trembling. A console at the center of the room pulsed with golden light, waiting for someone to activate it. She turned to John. "This is it." John nodded. "Go ahead." She reached out, and the room came to life. Holographic images flickered, showing battlefields from long ago, worlds burning, leaders making speeches. And then, the final truth. The wardens standing before both armies, controlling them. They had manipulated both sides of the war, kept entire civilizations trapped in fear. Lyra staggered back as the full weight of her lost memories hit her. John clenched his jaw. Those bastards. Eckhart's fists were shaking. They made us fight for nothing. The vault's lights pulsed brighter. Then, a warning siren blared. John's instincts flared. We're not alone. The entrance slammed shut, and from the shadows, the High Warden stepped into the vault. Lyra's blood turned cold. He had followed them, and now he was going to make sure the truth never left this planet. The final confrontation. The vault of truth trembled as the High Warden stepped forward, his dark robes flowing as if made of living shadows. His presence made the air heavy, thick with an unseen force pressing against John Carter's chest. Behind him, the entrance had sealed shut, trapping them inside. John's fingers twitched toward his rifle, but he already knew bullets wouldn't work on this thing. The warden's golden eyes flickered with something ancient and unreadable. He looked at Lyra, who was standing near the glowing console, her breathing ragged. Then he spoke. "You should not have come here." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The power behind it made the entire vault hum with energy, as if the walls themselves could feel his presence. Lyra stood frozen. The memories were still coming back, piece by piece, but there was one thing she understood now. This was the being who had trapped her in stone centuries ago. The warden had been the architect of the war, the one who ensured that civilizations would forever remain under the control of fear, and she had tried to stop him. She had failed. Now she had a second chance. The lies of the wardens. John stepped forward, keeping his stance firm. "You've been lying for centuries." The High Warden tilted his head slightly, as if amused. "Lies," he echoed. "There are no lies, only control." John clenched his jaw. "You made entire planets fight for nothing. You killed millions. And when Lyra tried to stop you, you silenced her." The warden's gaze flickered toward Lyra again. "I gave her mercy." Lyra's hands tightened into fists. "Mercy, you erased me." The air shuddered around them. For the first time, John saw uncertainty in the warden's expression. Lyra wasn't supposed to wake up. And now, she had the truth. She took a deep breath, stepping closer to the glowing console. "It's over," she said, her voice steady. "The war, your control, everything ends today." She placed her hands on the console, and the vault of truth came alive. Unleashing the truth. The entire chamber lit up as ancient systems activated. Holographic displays erupted from the walls. Recordings of the wardens manipulating governments, faking wars, erasing history. It was proof. John's heart pounded. If they could get this data out to the galaxy, everything would change. The warden's expression darkened. Enough. With a single movement, he raised his hand. And Lyra screamed as a surge of black energy wrapped around her, lifting her into the air. John's instincts kicked in. He fired. A plasma shot hit the warden directly in the chest and did absolutely nothing. The warden tilted his head slightly, as if John was a minor inconvenience. Then, with a flick of his fingers, John went flying. He slammed into a pillar, pain exploding across his body. The rifle fell from his grip. Eckhart charged from the side, his plasma blade flashing through the air. The warden caught the blade with his bare hand. Eckar's eyes widened. The warden twisted his wrist, shattering the blade into pieces. Eckar barely had time to react before the warden threw him aside, slamming him against the wall. Then he turned back to Lyra, still trapped in his power. "I turned you to stone for a reason," he said softly. "The galaxy was not meant to know." Lyra struggled, her body writhing against the force holding her. But as the console's light flickered, something shifted inside her. A new memory surfaced, a memory of who she was before the curse. She had been a warrior, a leader, the last of the royal bloodline. But more than that, she had been something more, the power of the forgotten. The warden tightened his grip, but something was wrong. Lyra stopped struggling and smiled. For the first time, fear flickered in the warden's golden eyes. The room shook violently. The energy surrounding Lyra reversed, shattering apart. She dropped to the ground, landing on her feet, stronger than before. A golden glow erupted from her skin, raw energy flowing through her veins. The warden stepped back. Lyra lifted a hand, and the shadows around the warden began to dissolve. "This is why you feared me," she said softly. The warden let out a furious snarl. He raised both hands, darkness swirling, ready to strike. Lyra countered. With a single movement, she unleashed a pulse of golden light that ripped through the vault. The warden screamed. The shadows melted away, his form breaking apart, as if he had never been fully real, just a construct of darkness and control. And then, he was gone. The war ends today. The vault was silent. John coughed, pushing himself to his feet. What just happened? Lyra turned to him, her eyes still glowing. The curse was completely gone. "I remembered who I was," she said. Eckar groaned, pulling himself up from the floor. "And what exactly does that mean?" Lyra turned back to the console, where the recordings were still playing. The truth of the war, exposed for all to see. "It means," she said, "it's time for the galaxy to wake up." John walked to her side. "You think this is enough to take them down?" Lyra's expression was unreadable. "The wardens built their empire on fear. If we take that away..." She pressed a single button. The vault's data was instantly transmitted across the galaxy. Every planet, every ship, every leader. They would all know the truth now. The war was a lie. The wardens had tricked them all. And their power was over. John let out a slow breath. "So, what now?" Lyra turned toward him. The golden glow in her eyes dimmed, but something else remained. A quiet determination. "They spent centuries controlling the galaxy," she said. "Now, it's time for the galaxy to decide what happens next." John grinned. "You really were a princess." Lyra chuckled softly. "Not anymore." She turned to Eckar. "You were raised to believe the wardens were saviors. Now you know the truth. What will you do?" Eckar took a deep breath, then sheathed his broken blade. "Fight for what's real." John clapped a hand on his shoulder. "That's the spirit." Lyra looked out at the vast galaxy beyond. The war was over. But the real battle, the battle to rebuild what was lost, was only beginning. She was ready. The truth will set her free. The galaxy had changed in an instant. The moment Lyra activated the Vault of Truth, the transmission spread like wildfire, reaching every known system, every major government, and every hidden colony. The truth, the great deception of the wardens, was no longer a secret. Entire civilizations now knew that they had been played, manipulated into wars that never needed to be fought. The fear that had kept them enslaved to the warden's rule was shattering, and with that fear gone, the real war was about to begin. John Carter stood at the edge of the vault's entrance, looking up at the night sky. His ship, the Rogue Star, was prepped and ready for takeoff. But the galaxy outside wasn't the same one he had left behind. Beside him, Ecker tightened the strap on his damaged armor. His golden eyes burned with something new, not just loyalty, but purpose. "The wardens will not go quietly," he muttered. "They will fight to reclaim their power." John let out a breath. Let them try. He turned to Lyra. She stood just outside the vault's control terminal, staring at her own reflection in the polished metal wall. She was no longer stone, no longer trapped in time. She was alive again. But for the first time, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. The galaxy's response. A loud beeping sounded from John's wrist communicator. He flicked it open, and a dozen messages flooded in. "Admiral Wren of the Terran Fleet. Carter, what the hell did you do? Every government in the quadrant is demanding answers. Governor Threll of the Andarian Republic, you have my full support. We suspected the wardens for years, but now we have proof. The Free Colonies broadcast. People are rising up. The warden-controlled sectors are collapsing." John couldn't help but grin. "This is bigger than I thought." Ecker folded his arms. "You exposed the lie. Now the galaxy will decide what happens next." Lyra finally turned toward them. "Not all of them will believe it." She was right. The wardens weren't just going to disappear. There were still loyalists, still powerful rulers who had built their entire existence on the warden's control. And those people would rather burn the galaxy down than let it slip from their fingers. The warden's last move, before John could respond, a shadow fell over them. The vault's energy flickered. A low hum filled the air, growing into a roar. Lyra's eyes widened. "They're coming." The three of them spun toward the sky. Above the planet, the stars shifted, and then something massive emerged from hyperspace. A warden dreadnought. It was larger than any ship John had ever seen, its black, metallic hull covered in glowing red runes, and at the center of it, a dark, shifting shape loomed. Another warden. But this one wasn't like the others. This was something older, more powerful. Lyra's breath hitched. "I remember him." John glanced at her. "Who?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "The first warden. A fight for the future." The ground beneath them shook violently as energy pulses rained down from the dreadnought, exploding across the surface. John grabbed Lyra's hand and ran. "We need to get off this planet. Now." Ecker sprinted ahead, opening the Rogue Star's ramp as they bolted toward the ship. Another blast hit the ground behind them, sending a wave of fire and debris into the air. Lyra turned mid-run, throwing out a hand. A golden shield erupted around them, blocking the impact. John gaped. "Since when can you do that?" Lyra didn't answer. She was still discovering what she had become. They made it onto the ship just as the warden's voice boomed across the sky. "You cannot undo what was written. The galaxy is ours to control." John slammed the controls. The Rogue Star shot upward, rocketing into the sky, dodging incoming fire from the dreadnought. But as they climbed higher, the first warden moved. He didn't need a ship. His entire body shifted into the void, reforming above them, standing in the vacuum of space as if it were nothing. And then he reached out. The stars dimmed. Gravity vanished. John felt the ship stopping in midair, caught in the warden's grip like a fly trapped in amber. Alarms blared. The engines screamed. The ship wasn't moving. The warden's voice whispered directly into John's mind. "You think knowledge can break the chains of control. You are wrong." John fought against it, his hands gripping the controls. But nothing worked. They were trapped. Lyra's eyes flashed. She stood up, stepping toward the viewport. "Let us go," she said calmly. The warden's golden eyes burned. "You should never have woken up." Lyra's body glowed brighter. The energy inside her, the power the wardens feared most, was awakening. John felt the ship lurch forward. The grip was breaking. Lyra lifted both hands. And then, she let go. A shockwave of golden light erupted from her body, shattering the warden's grip, blasting the ship forward. The first warden staggered back. For the first time, his face showed shock. "You," he whispered, "you have become something more." Lyra's expression was unreadable. "I have become what you feared." She thrust her hand forward. A golden spear of energy shot from her palm, piercing through the void, and striking the dreadnought. The massive ship shook violently, cracks of golden light spreading across its surface. The first warden screamed. The ship began to collapse in on itself, breaking apart as if reality itself was rejecting it. The last thing John saw before they jumped into hyperspace was the warden's form disintegrating into the void. A new beginning. Silence filled the ship as they escaped. John exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Well, that was something. Ecker let out a breath. The wardens will not recover from this. Lyra sat down, staring at her hands. The glow had faded, but something inside her felt different now. John leaned against the console. "So what now?" Lyra looked at him, her golden eyes steady. "Now we rebuild." She glanced at the stars ahead. The galaxy will never be the same again. The wardens controlled history for centuries. Now, we write our own. John grinned. "Sounds like a hell of a story." Lyra smiled softly. "It is, and it's only just beginning." As the rogue star disappeared into the stars, the echoes of the past faded away. And for the first time in centuries, Lyra was free.